So we have a really unique stack of sources on the table for this deep dive.
Yeah, we really do. It's not our usual.
Right. Like, instead of pulling from, I don't know, a dozen different academic journals or digging through a mountain of news articles, our primary focus today is just a single, incredibly profound autobiographical essay. It is titled IMAN JIHAD QADAR, Why I Chose a Muslim Name That Became a Statement of Faith.
Yeah, it's quite a title.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive, for you, the listener, is to really take this man's deeply personal spiritual journey and kind of reverse engineer it.
Right.
We are going to extract what is essentially a complete spiritual grammar.
So imagine waiting like 26 years. You survive a global pandemic, and then you have this kind of minor spiritual breakdown in the checkout line of a supermarket.
Right.
And all of that just to finally earn the right to your own last name.
It is a pretty wild journey.
Yeah. I mean, usually, a name is just a family heirloom. It's this label handed to you before you can even open your eyes, really.
Exactly. You just carry it.
Right. You just carry it. But today, in this deep dive, we are looking at someone who completely shattered that inheritance model. We're looking at a man from the Caribbean island of Saint Lucia who was born Crispin Fedee in 1956.
Yeah.
And he converted to Islam in 1999 and then spent the next quarter of a century basically building a completely new identity for himself.
Right. The name IMAN JIHAD QADAR.
Exactly. IMAN JIHAD QADAR. And the mission for us today is to really explore why he chose to spiritually identify himself with these three very profound Arabic words.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating inversion of how we normally think about identity, I think, because, people naturally ask him why he changed his name and what those three words actually mean.
Sure, yeah.
And he could easily just give them the dictionary translation.
Like just hand them a glossary.
Right, exactly. Just say faith, striving, and divine decree, and then just move on. But what this source material, this personal essay he wrote, what it reveals is that translation alone is just completely inadequate here.
Because he didn't just pick words that sounded nice. He adopted like a set of operating instructions for his life.
Precisely. I mean, the essay is this rigorous theological exploration, but it's disguised as a memoir.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, he's using his own life, his struggles with severe dyslexia, for example, his community building, his moments of really deep doubt, to define three of the most heavily loaded and frankly misunderstood concepts in Islamic theology.
Yeah, very misunderstood.
And he's showing how these three words form a complete, he calls it a spiritual grammar. So like what has to live in the heart, what must be expressed physically, and how you survive the outcomes you can't control.
Well, I want to start with the mechanics of the change itself, because changing your name in your 40s is a massive disruption.
No, absolutely.
There's this tendency, I think, to assume that when a person converts and changes their name, they're trying to erase their past.
Right.
Or maybe, they're rejecting their family or something. But he draws a very firm line against that interpretation, doesn't he?
He does. He is really careful to point out that Islamic tradition doesn't actually demand you erase a lawful birth name.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you certainly aren't permitted to, falsify your lineage or pretend you come from a different family.
Right, right.
The historical context he provides in the essay is that the Prophet Muhammad only really altered names if they carried idolatrous meanings.
Yeah.
Or if they were inherently arrogant or harmful in some way. But a lot of his earliest followers just kept the names their parents gave them.
Meaning this wasn't a mandate for him. He wasn't forced by some rigid dogma to drop the name Crispin Fedee.
Exactly.
It was a conscious, very deliberate choice.
He describes it as a declaration of direction.
A declaration of direction. Why?
Yeah, if you're going to choose a label for yourself, why not make it a constant daily reminder of the person you are asking the divine to help you become?
That makes a lot of sense.
And that specific direction for him begins with the first word of his chosen name, which is Iman.
Right, Iman, which we typically just translate as faith.
Yeah.
But, reading through his notes, treating Iman as just a synonym for the English word faith seems to severely undersell what he's actually talking about.
It does. It really does.
Because in a lot of Western frameworks, faith is often treated as this private, this internal switch, right? You either believe in a creator or you don't. It's like a box you check on a census form.
Right. It's very passive. But if we look at the linguistic architecture of the Qur'an, that passive definition just falls apart immediately.
How so?
Well, the word iman comes from the Arabic root, hamza min nun, and Arabic is a root-based language.
Right.
Which means that words in this family, they all share a kind of conceptual DNA.
Okay.
So this root is tied to concepts like security, trust, safety, and honesty. And what's really striking is the frequency. Variations of this root occur 879 times in the text.
Wait, 879 times?
Yeah, 879.
That's not a fringe concept or some theological footnote. If a single root is appearing that frequently, it has to be like the core operating system of the entire text.
It is the absolute foundation. And because it's the foundation, the author stresses that Quranic faith cannot be reduced to just a cold opinion.
The cold opinion.
Right. It isn't just an intellectual acknowledgement that, yes, God exists. He actually quotes a very specific verse, chapter 49, verse 14, which completely dismantles the idea of passive faith.
Oh, is that the verse addressing the desert Arabs?
Yes, exactly.
Where they claim to have faith, and the text essentially corrects them.
Right. The text tells them, you have not believed, rather say, we have submitted, for faith has not yet entered your hearts.
Man, that is a harsh, distinct separation.
It really is.
It implies you can go through all the physical motions, like you can submit outwardly, you can follow all the rules and still be entirely hollow on the inside.
Yeah, it creates this protective barrier against hypocrisy. And the author uses this to show that genuine iman requires an inward transformation, like it has to enter the heart.
Right.
But, and this is crucial, it doesn't stay there. Throughout the Qur'an, faith is almost universally paired with righteous action. They are inextricably linked.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds a lot like having a perfect, meticulously drawn blueprint for a house.
Okay, yeah.
The blueprint is essential. You can't build anything without it. But you can't live inside a blueprint.
Yeah.
You eventually have to, buy the bricks.
That is the exact tension he's highlighting. A blueprint without bricks is just a piece of paper. But bricks without a blueprint is just a chaotic pile of rubble.
Yeah.
And to illustrate how this blueprint gets built, he points to the early companions of the prophet.
Okay, who does he mention?
Well, he looks at figures like Bilal, for instance.
Oh, right, Bilal.
Oh, Bilal's story is foundational to understanding this.
Right.
So Bilal was an enslaved man in Makkah who accepted Islam in the very early days. And when his enslaver found out, Bilal was dragged out into the desert during the absolute hottest part of the day. He was pinned to the burning sand with a massive boulder placed on his chest.
Wow.
And he was told to just renounce his belief. Yet, under this agonizing physical torture, he simply repeated, Ahad, Ahad, which means God is one.
That is just incredible endurance. And he also mentioned Sumaya, right, who endured lethal persecution rather than recant.
Yes, she was actually the first martyr in Islam.
Oh. And Abu Bakr, who systematically spent his own wealth to purchase the freedom of persecuted believers like Bilal.
Exactly.
The point the author is making is that their iman wasn't some philosophical debate they had in a coffee shop.
No, not at all.
It produced actual endurance, massive financial sacrifice, and just a willingness to face death. It was entirely visible in the material world.
It was lived. And connecting this back to his own life as a convert in the Caribbean, he admits that faith isn't just a one-time transaction.
Right.
He had to learn, often painfully and honestly more than once, that faith must be consciously chosen over and over again. Iman is the act of constantly returning to that inner anchor.
Man, that resonates far beyond just theological circles. I mean, anyone listening right now can look at their own life and ask, how many of my core beliefs are just inherited labels?
Right.
Like things I believe simply because my parents believe them or my demographic believes them, or let's be honest, my algorithm feeds them to me.
Which happens to all of us.
Right. Versus convictions that I have actually battle-tested in the real world. It's a really heavy challenge to evaluate what is actually anchoring us.
It is a heavy challenge.
Right.
And it leads directly into the next phase of the essay, because if Iman is that internal anchor, that absolute conviction, well, it cannot sit still in a vacuum.
It has to do something.
Exactly. A belief that profound demands movement. It demands exertion. And that pushes us right into the second pillar of his name, which is undeniably the most controversial word in Western media.
Jihad.
We definitely have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. In Western public discourse, jihad is almost exclusively translated as holy war or terrorism.
Yeah, it's undeniably the most heavily loaded word he could have possibly chosen.
It is. But he doesn't shy away from that friction at all. He confronts it directly by kind of stripping away the media headlines and going straight back to the linguistics.
Which is where the real meaning usually is anyway.
Right. He points out that the word comes from the root jimhadal. And this root conveys exertion, profound effort, and the spending of one's utmost strength. It appears 41 times in the Qur'an across its various forms. And linguistically, it does not mean holy war.
It doesn't.
No. When the Qur'an wants to talk specifically about armed combat or fighting, it uses entirely different terminology, like the word qital.
Okay, qital.
Yeah. Jihad is a vastly broader category of strenuous effort in a noble cause.
And he gives a really compelling example in the text to prove this point. He cites a verse that commands the prophet to strive against disbelievers with a mighty striving. And he uses the word jihad.
Right.
But the instrument of that striving is the Qur'an itself.
Exactly.
It's a book. So the effort being described there is entirely intellectual and moral. It's the effort of answering falsehood with truth, not crossing swords.
That's a great point. To ground this broader understanding, the author shares a historical anecdote involving the prophet's wife, Aisha. She asked him about participating in jihad, and his answer just totally recontextualizes the whole concept.
It really does. And what did the prophet say?
He responded that an accepted Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, was the best jihad for women.
Which completely shatters the stereotype.
Total.
Because the Hajj is a purely peaceful but deeply exhausting physical and spiritual act.
Oh, yeah, it is grueling.
You're dealing with massive crowds, intense heat, financial sacrifice, and a strict requirement to maintain absolute patience.
Right.
There's zero warfare involved.
None. But it requires monumental exertion, which is the literal definition of the root word.
Right.
Now, the author is intellectually honest enough to admit that the Qur'an does sometimes use jihad in contexts that include lawful armed struggle.
Sure.
He doesn't try to, whitewash history or empty the word of its military dimensions entirely.
Because if you just say it only means internal struggle, you're ignoring historical texts.
Yeah.
He's looking at the reality of 7th century survival.
Exactly. But he meticulously outlines the ethical limits placed on that struggle, like absolute prohibitions against aggression, commands to incline toward peace if the enemy does, strict protections for asylum seekers, for non-combatants, for the environment even.
Wow.
He draws a very hard line here. The deliberate murder of innocent people, terrorism, is not magically sanctified just because someone shouts an Arabic word while doing it.
Right. Private rage is not a sacred license.
Beautifully put. And that brings it back to the personal level for him. When you map this definition onto the author, Crispin Fedee, his choice of this word becomes deeply poignant. I mean, he is a convert. He lives with dyslexia, which he notes makes learning and writing a severe daily struggle.
Yeah.
He was a business owner, a jeweler, and he helped establish the first organized Muslim community life in Saint Lucia.
Building a community from scratch, managing learning difficulties, sustaining a business, all of that is systemic friction.
So for him, jihad isn't a political slogan. It's an admission of vulnerability. It's him stating that his struggle with his own weakness is ongoing and that he has to fight internal battles every single day just to maintain his iman.
I noticed a really fascinating methodological choice he makes in the essay when discussing this internal struggle.
Oh, the part about the hadith.
Yes. He deliberately avoids using a very famous quote. You hear it constantly in interfaith dialogues, the idea of returning from the lesser jihad of the battlefield to the greater jihad of fighting the ego.
It's a very popular slogan, yeah.
But he refuses to use it. Why is that?
Because scholars consider it a textually weak or unauthentic hadith, and he argues that you don't need a weak slogan to prove the importance of self-discipline.
Right, the verified texts already do that perfectly.
Exactly. He prefers quoting the prophet saying that true strength isn't about physical wrestling, but controlling yourself when you are consumed by anger.
Okay, so if Iman is the blueprint, jihad is the friction required to actually build it.
I like that.
You can't move a vehicle forward without the friction of the tires against the road, right? If the road is perfectly smooth ice, the engine revs, the wheels spin, but you go absolutely nowhere.
Right, you need that traction.
His dyslexia, the community building, controlling the ego, that's the friction. It's the admission that the spiritual engine is going to meet resistance.
That's a vital distinction. It's not a boast that he has permanently conquered his ego. It's an acknowledgement that the effort has to be continuous. It never really stops.
But here is where the narrative takes a really unexpected turn in his life.
Yeah, gets intense here.
What happens when you have the internal faith and you're generating all this friction You're putting in the maximum effort, but the engine just stalls out entirely.
Yeah.
What happens when you hit a wall that effort simply cannot break down? That is exactly the crisis the author hit between 2020 and 2025.
Right. So in 2007, he had transitioned to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which he saw as a profound elevation of his spiritual journey.
Okay.
He had decades of faith and effort behind him at this point, but then the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. And like millions of others, he was plunged into a season of severe distress.
Yeah, everyone felt that.
But for him, it manifested as a really deep crisis of faith. Doubts began to creep in. He felt stranded at a spiritual crossroads, questioning his life's purpose and the very certainties he had built his whole identity around.
It takes a lot of vulnerability for a theological writer to admit that.
Oh, absolutely.
He had Iman, he was doing the jihad, and he was still spiraling. And the catalyst that finally pulled him out of this spiral didn't happen during a deep meditation in a mosque.
No, it didn't.
It happened on a random Tuesday in a grocery store.
It's such an incredible detail. He was standing in the cashier's line, and he noticed the former prime minister of Saint Lucia and his wife in front of him.
Okay.
And to the author, they looked weighed down, burdened by the ordinary, mundane difficulties of just existing.
Just buying groceries.
Yeah. And he observed them again a few days later, riding public transit.
Wow.
The author makes it clear he wasn't looking down on them, but the visual contrast shattered a cognitive illusion for him. Here was an individual who once commanded the highest authority in the nation, now navigating the exact same uncertain, tiring reality as everyone else. And seeing that, it completely shattered the author's illusion of human agency. Seeing that transition from ultimate authority to everyday vulnerability, it forced him to realize how fragile wealth, status, and control truly are.
Wow.
It proved to him that eventually every human being is fundamentally dependent.
That encounter in the supermarket seemed to open a floodgate for him. He started having these intense, racing thoughts about destiny.
Yeah.
Like, why do some people rise while others fall? Why do doors open for some and slam shut for others? And to process all this chaotic thinking, he turned to something that feels incredibly out of place in a theological essay.
It really does.
He logged onto an AI platform, DeepSeek specifically, to talk about divine decree.
It is a jarring juxtaposition. You have a man whose entire worldview is anchored in 7th century Arabic revelation, who meticulously verifies the authenticity of ancient texts, seeking clarity from a large language model in 2025.
I have to push back on this, or at least explore the tension here, because it feels a little contradictory. How does a man who reveres divine scripture reconcile processing his spiritual crisis through a synthetic chatbot? Is he treating the AI as some sort of modern oracle?
It's a fair question, and he anticipates that exact criticism.
The author is fiercely clear on this boundary. He states explicitly that the Qur'an and the authentic teachings of the Prophet are his only authoritative foundations.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So he wasn't treating the AI as a digital oracle. Given his dyslexia and the sheer volume of his swirling thoughts, it functioned as a cognitive mirror.
Ah, I see.
He used it as a sounding board to synthesize and organize his understanding of destiny during a period when his own mind was too overwhelmed to do it alone.
And what emerged from that synthesis was a profound reframe. He realized that Qadar is not a cage that locks you into predetermined failure. He described it as a divine horizon.
A divine horizon within which repentance and return are always possible.
That reframe turns what feels like a spiritual failure into a necessary course correction. He realized his crisis, his doubts, and his failures weren't the end of his story. They were the measure designed to force him to return to God with greater humility. He recognized that Qadar releases you from the burden of worshiping outcomes.
You no longer have to tie your fundamental self-worth to whether your plans execute perfectly.
Because you were never the one in control of the final result anyway. The profound peace he found in relinquishing control over outcomes is what led him, in 2025, to finalize his identity. He transitioned from Iman Jihad to Iman Jihad Qadar.
Which brings us to the word Qadar.
Right, Qadar, which is typically translated as divine decree or destiny. It stems from the root Qaf dal Ra, which carries the meaning of measuring, determining, apportioning, or setting a specific proportion.
And how often does that appear?
It appears 132 times in the Qur'an across its various forms.
Measuring, like assigning a specific volume or limit to something?
Exactly. Theologically, it signifies God's absolute knowledge, measure, and sovereignty over creation. Nothing exists outside of this decree. The Qur'an states, indeed, we have created everything according to a measure.
Okay.
But the author is hyper-vigilant about making one thing crystal clear. Qadar is not fatalism.
Right, because the immediate psychological trap is, if everything is already measured and written down, why bother? Why generate the friction of jihad if the destination is already locked in?
It's a paradox. But Islamic thought demands holding two truths in tension. Yes, the divine decree is absolute. But the Quran simultaneously declares, man shall have nothing but what he strives for, and that God does not change the condition of a people until they change themselves.
So human beings possess genuine intent and choice.
Yes, and they are responsible for the actions they take.
It's a paradox to us, but presumably not to the divine architecture. The author uses two historical case studies to show how this actually functions in the real world, rather than just as a philosophical debate, right?
He does, and they are brilliant examples. The first is the Prophet Muhammad's migration, the Hijrah, from Mecca to Medina to escape assassination.
Okay, set the scene for us.
The Prophet possessed absolute, unshakable trust in God's ultimate decree. But he didn't just walk out his front door into the desert and expect a miracle to save him.
Right, he didn't just wing it.
Not at all. He executed a masterclass in risk management. He planned the route in secret. He hired an expert guide. They traveled at night. And he used every single earthly precaution available to him.
He didn't abandon the friction. He used the means.
True reliance on God, a concept known as tawakkul, means utilizing every lawful means at your disposal and then surrendering the outcome to God. The author frames this beautifully. You cannot neglect the necessary effort and then try to disguise your laziness as piety.
Disguising laziness as piety. Man, that is incredibly sharp.
It really cuts to the core of it.
And the second historical example he pulls involves Umar ibn al-Khattab, who's one of the closest companions of the Prophet and the second caliph of Islam.
Okay.
Which obviously mirrors the author's own experience with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. So during Umar's leadership, he was traveling toward a region in Syria where the plague of Amwas had broken out.
Right.
Upon learning about the severity of the outbreak, he consulted with his advisors and made the executive decision to halt the journey and turn his people back. He refused to lead them into a plague zone. Very sensible. But one of his commanders challenged him, asking if he was fleeing from the decree of God.
The implication being, if God wrote that you're going to die of the plague, you can't escape it, so turning back shows a lack of faith.
Exactly. But Umar's response is one of the most famous in Islamic history. He looked at the commander and said, I am fleeing from Allah's decree to Allah's decree.
I want to pause on that because the psychological weight of that statement is massive, fleeing from the decree to the decree.
It is so profound. It means taking a precaution is not an act of rebellion against destiny. Taking a precaution is an active, responsible choice within the framework of destiny.
Yeah.
Qadar does not excuse helplessness. What it actually does, according to the author, is govern human regret.
Okay, wait. If it governs regret, does that mean it acts as a psychological shield? Like if you fail at something, you don't agonize over it, you just chalk it up to destiny.
Well, it's not an excuse for failure if you didn't try. The Prophet explicitly taught that you must put in the effort, seek help, and not act helplessly. But if, after doing everything in your power, you still suffer a setback, you are commanded not to torture yourself with what-ifs.
I see.
You shouldn't say, if only I had done this, that wouldn't have happened. Instead, you say, God decreed, and he did what he willed. It severs the loop of endless regret.
It's the ultimate antidote to modern burnout, isn't it?
Totally.
We live in a culture that insists we are 100% responsible for our outcomes. If your startup fails, it's because you didn't grind hard enough. If you get sick, it's because your diet wasn't optimized.
Right, it's exhausting.
We attach our entire self-worth to the result. But Qadar insists you are only responsible for the effort. It reminds me of a farmer.
Okay, a farmer.
Yeah, think about it. You buy the highest quality seeds, you plow the soil, you water the field relentlessly. That is your effort, your jihad. But whether the storm clouds roll in and it actually rains, that is Qadar. That is the divine measure. You don't curse yourself for a drought because the rain was never in your jurisdiction to begin with.
That is a perfect analogy. And that realization is exactly what liberated the author in 2025.
It set him free.
It really did. He realized he could not control the ultimate success of his community work, or the public reception of his writing, or the turbulence of a global pandemic. He was finally set free from worshiping outcomes.
Wow.
And that profound surrender is what earned him the final piece of his identity. That is the exact moment he formally adopted Qadar, completing the name, IMAN JIHAD QADAR.
Which brings us to the architecture of the name itself.
Yes?
We have the internal blueprint, the friction of effort, and the surrender to the rain. The author is very adamant that the sequence of these three words is not arbitrary, right?
Right. It's not just a collection of noble-sounding terms. It is a highly specific, linear spiritual grammar.
Okay, so the order is the entire point.
It must flow from Iman to Jihad to Qadar. If you disrupt the sequence, the spiritual ecosystem basically collapses. Well, for instance, if you claim Iman but refuse Jihad, your faith is just a passive profession. It has no pulse because it never risks anything to manifest as service or obedience.
That's the blueprint locked in a drawer.
Exactly.
But what if you reverse it? What if you have intense jihad but no iman anchoring it?
That is extremely dangerous. Effort without internal divine conviction easily degrades into ego-driven activism, a desire for dominance, or outright aggression.
Oh, I see.
It becomes friction just for the sake of starting a fire. And even if you have the first two, like if you have sincere faith and you put in the grueling work, if you lack Qadar, you remain spiritually vulnerable.
Because you're still attached to the result.
Exactly. Without Qadar, your effort is completely unprotected from your own ego. If you succeed, you succumb to arrogance, believing your own brilliance caused the victory. If you fail, you fall into despair, believing the universe is unjust or that you are inherently worthless. Qadar is the anchor that keeps human effort humble in victory and resilient in defeat.
Looking at this entire arc, what strikes me most isn't just the theology, it's the timeline.
The timeline is incredible.
He accepted Islam in 1999. He adopted Iman Jihad relatively early. But it took him until 2025. It took 26 years, a terrifying pandemic, a crisis that shook his foundations, and a humbling realization on a Tuesday afternoon to earn that final word.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much of our chosen identity is purely aspirational.
And the author volunteers that humility freely. He explicitly writes that this name is not a declaration that he has achieved spiritual perfection.
Right.
He calls it a prayer and a program. It is an instruction manual for the man he is begging God to help him become. He doesn't hide his dyslexia, his doubts, or his struggles. Instead, he frames them as the exact necessary road that forced him to dig deeper into the text and into his own heart.
And pragmatically, it functions as this brilliant mechanism for outreach, for dawah.
Right. It forces a conversation. When someone asks him what his name means, he has an immediate opening to bypass the media sound bites.
He doesn't just give the glossary definition.
No, he gets to dismantle the extremist distortions of jihad and the fatalistic misunderstandings of Qadar by walking people straight back to the linguistic roots and the historical nuance.
It is a staggering journey of self-definition. From Crispin Fedee to Iman Jihad QADAR, establishing the internal compass, generating the necessary movement, and finally, after decades of friction, learning to accept the peace of the outcome.
And it leaves us with a really compelling question about how we view ourselves, doesn't it? We tend to define ourselves by our worst mistakes or our most painful struggles, rather than seeing them as the required friction for our growth.
Yeah.
And we constantly tie our worth to outcomes we don't control, rather than finding peace in the sincerity of our effort.
Which brings us right to the doorstep of anyone listening. The author treats his name as a daily program, a set of instructions. Most of us walk around with labels we just accepted. Our job titles, our roles in a family, the ways we describe our own personalities. We treat these labels as permanent cages, as fixed descriptions of who we currently are and always will be. But what if we started viewing the labels we accept as instructions for who we are striving to be?
If a label is a direction rather than a cage, your daily reality completely shifts.
So, here is something to mull over today. Think back to where we started, to the idea of a name being an inheritance you just passively accept.
Yeah.
If you had the courage to break that inheritance today, and you had to consciously choose 3 words to serve as the spiritual grammar for the rest of your life.
That's a heavy question.
1 word to set your internal conviction, 1 word to define the friction of your daily effort, and 1 word to establish what you are willing to surrender. What would your 3 words be? It took the author a quarter of a century to find his.
It is a question that demands a lifetime of friction to truly answer.
We'll leave you to think on that.